When I started working at Netflix on my first big budget animated feature, there were many things I learned on the job that I just couldn't learn in any storyboarding class. But the one experience that stood out to me the most was storyboarding for 3 different directors on the same film. In this case, I worked under Kibwe Tavares, Peter Ramsey, and John Garth. Most of the general public doesn't really know that the animation pipeline is quite different from the live action production. And one of those differences is that sometimes an animated film could have 3 directors on the same film. For example, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse had 3 directors, and more recently Kung Fu Panda 4 had 2 directors. Usually when there are multiple directors, each director would have an area of the film that they would focus on more than the other directors. For example, one director may focus more on the writing and story, another the art, and another the animation. This is a very common practice in the animation industry, but this was not the experience I had. Now what I'm going to talk about is really nuanced, and it may not seem like a big deal if you're already someone with years of experience, but if you're just starting out, I think this is something you should pay attention to. So here is what I learned from boarding for 3 different directors on the same film. At the very beginning, my film had one director, Kibwe Tavares, a director who came mainly from live action. This was his first animated feature film. On joining the crew, Kibwe told us about his backstory and how he got into film. He also showed us his previous films, which gave me an idea of his directing style. Kibwe has a very grounded type of vision even when he uses VFX or computer generated characters. They don't look overly fantastical, so when boarding the film, I kept this in mind. Kibwe's style took a bit of getting used to in my first few boards. I remember boarding some really exaggerated actions from characters, but in feedback sessions, he would always feel as though it was too much. This happened a few times until I got a hold of Kibwe's style and received less of these types of notes. For a large portion of the storyboarding phase, Kibwe was the solo director of the film, but in 2022, Kibwe had to temporarily leave to go back to London to finish working on his live-action film, The Kitchen. This is where we were fortunate enough for Peter Ramsey, who was a producer on the film, to come and direct while Kibwe was away. Peter is known for winning the Oscar for Best Animated Film as co-director on Spider-Verse and also directing DreamWorks' Guardians. He has experience in both live action and animated films, so his directing style was much different to Kibwe's. While boarding under Peter's direction, he would request more exaggerated situations and set pieces, usually things that Kibwe would not normally go for. His directing style would not only be expressed through his choices, but how he actually gave notes. If Peter wanted a specific angle for a shot, he pulled out a piece of paper and did a rough sketch of what he wanted, which made making corrections really fast. Because Kibwe could not draw, all his notes were verbal, which required me to do a lot of interpreting of the vision requested. I found this to be a very interesting experience because each director's vision and style of working was quite different, and it forced me to learn how to adapt to the mindset of each director. This is exactly what I was referring to when I mentioned that you can't learn this in a class. A story artist not only needs to have technical skill, but understanding and comprehension, but also the ability to switch that understanding from one vision to the next. After Kibwe returned, he directed the film alone for a while until John Garth became co-director, who many of you all will know as the director of Paperman, which won the Oscar for Best Animated Short Film. This directing duo is very similar to what I mentioned before in Kung Fu Panda. Unfortunately, I didn't get to work with Kibwe and John as a duo before the film got cancelled, but from the little what I was able to grasp, the directing style did change as John brought another way of thinking. My assumption is the vision that I would have had to adapt to with John and Kibwe would have been different to when Peter and Kibwe directed solo. If you are a board artist trying to break into the industry, this is a skill you don't get to practice at all before you actually arrive on the job, and it's not something that mentors can teach you in a short space of time. So the question is, how do you become so adaptable in such short spaces of time if you happen to be in a situation like mine? First, you always need to listen and ask questions. Every director is different, and even though they might be telling the same story, Their vision of the story will be completely different from another director. Every time a director is explaining something to you, forget taking notes and truly listen to what they are trying to communicate to you. And ask as many questions as possible if you don't understand something. Directors are usually very open to explaining things, especially if you didn't understand it in the first time. Secondly, don't let your personal vision of the story override the vision the director is trying to express to you. As artists, we would always have our personal takes on a script or story, but you have to detach from that and only focus on what your director wants to express. This can be really hard at first, but once you learn to let go, this becomes much more easy. It's okay to pitch ideas for a scene, but that's another topic for another day. Overall, this is a very nuanced skill you will develop the more directors you work with over time. If you struggle with it in the beginning, it's normal, but remember, it's all part of the process and growing as an artist. Every mistake you make will help you not only become a better board artist and filmmaker, but a great collaborator.